Welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Jon K. Uhler, LPC, which is Licensed Professional Counselor. He's also a certified clinical trauma professional and a certified sex offender treatment provider. He's worked for many, many years with the most sociopathic members of society in prisons, and he runs groups with sex offenders, and he also runs groups with the victims of sex offenders. He has a wealth of insight into the deviant mind, and in this conversation, we cover that and how it intersects with the sexual revolution or the gender revolution that's happening right now, and ways in which people can recognize when they're being manipulated, and what society is supposed to do with abusers, and what society is doing currently to promote, platform, and enable abusers. Without further ado, here is Jon Uhler.
It's a pleasure to connect. I've watched quite a few of your videos over the years.
Oh, really? I was going through your catalog. You gave me a couple of links, and I had one idea of you, like, oh, this guy's on the ball. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's not just on the ball, but he's in the shit, right? You really invested yourself in some really intense things,
and not by choice, or
no?
not anticipating it. Not, obviously it's a choice, but
not intentionally.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a therapist by trade, and then was kind of brought into. I didn't even know about the trans movement, but so I've got really a strange background, but it's perfect for, I guess, what I do, which is half therapy and then half dealing with perpetrators. So because of that perspective, I'm able to, when I work with the perpetrators, I'm able to ferret out whether they're lying through their teeth as to whether or not they've ever been injured, but then also had a chance to go deep into what I would say the criminal mind. So I used my position on psych staff. When I was in a seminar in the audience, a webinar with Bessel van der Kolk. It was interesting when he said, he wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And he said he used his time or his position there as a means of doing research, and I can relate. So that's how I speak to the criminal mind and psychopathy and sociopathy and all that. Because, it's an outside academic researcher's dream. It was a 11-year field research for me.
Oh, yeah.
Or a field study. So I use that intensively, and then have worked with survivors and then kids in the system. So in dealing with what I call the trans deception, that's why I find myself continued to be pulled back into that, because I know it's what I call the world's greatest sham. It's all fabricated. And
it's got very intense outcomes for those who submit their bodies to the process of transition.
And that's why I really appreciate you having all the survivors on your show, because exactly. But that's sadly the predictable outcome of manipulating kids. So this entire movement never existed, and so I guess I've just crossed a marker for me. I just turned 60. I don't feel it. I feel 25. And so I guess now I'm using that to my advantage. First of all, I say I'm old, but I guess it's given me some perspective. I never thought I'd say that, but that's how I can tell people definitively, this is all man-made. It's all contrived, because my background was dealing with the most severe cases in residential treatment. So if you want to find out anything that's true, work in foster care. And then group homes and residential treatment. I also have my own adolescent female, 12-bed adolescent female intensive treatment group home. So if you're going to ever find out anything true about kids and true about yourself, because they'll tell you. So if you want to find out about youth culture, you work with kids, step up or step down from a psych hospital, you're in the midst of it. So self-injurious behaviors, you're seeing all of it.
Yeah.
So what the trans deception is, the premise is that those of us up until quite frankly, it got underway with the maybe 2009, but if it weren't for the DSM-5, and so I have a bone to pick with certain individuals in my field, and I've made it public, sort of, online before I got kicked off of Twitter, now the second time, but I'm permanently suspended.
Wait, just recently?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not that I cared how many followers, but I was able then to kind of get a message out. And I think there's a little troll still in Twitter. Elon hasn't obviously been able to root them all out. Yeah, what I was speaking to the issue of men in drag that want to be around kids, because I don't address what adults do. I may have my own opinion, but I don't touch on that. So what I say is, if you're a deviant adult and you give clear evidence that you access porn on a regular basis, stay away from kids. And some of the legitimate drag queens, or I'll still use the term trans, but there's no such thing as trans, by the way. They will be the first to say, stay away from kids. So if especially as a male, if you give evidence of accessing pornography, then you don't belong around kids, around minors. Simple as that. And any reasonable adult would agree with that. But when you start to get pushback, the question is, why am I receiving pushback? As a matter of fact, furries are the worst. The first time I had heard about furries, and they hate this, I never heard about furries until hearing it. My introduction to the topic of furries was through a really heinous pedophile in sex offender treatment, and then doing his parole psychopath, so sex offender risk assessment, then parole psychopath in Pennsylvania. So I spent 11 years in the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania, the psych staff. And so this guy was, I wasn't able, in his case, to prevent him from getting out. I was able to stop about 19 guys from getting out, because the psych staff really holds the key to guys getting, those that are sex offenders.
Yeah.
And he was going to be able to get out. And so I was able to ask him. So he felt very emboldened. And so I was able to feed his ego and just ask how do certain guys get away with it? And he says, oh, there's a number of ways. So I was pumping him for information in the right way. It would take that kind of context to finally get truth out of these guys. And he says, well, we use a number of ways, furries. And I'm staring at him. He says, well, furries. I'm staring at him like, what? He says, you don't know about furries? And I said, I don't know. He says, oh, you need to get out more. I said, well, that's probably true, but what? He says, well, the costumes. I said, what? He said, it's like Disneyland, but we all have these suits and we get together. I said, a bunch of adults get together in suits. He says, oh, yeah. He says, but they target kids, meaning they draw kids in. He says, we have 100% of our identity covered. And he says, it's amazing how if you dress up, parents will hand their kids over to you.
Wow.
So when he was busted, it was through a sting. He thought he was communicating with a mother. It was actually a police officer.
Yeah.
And the arrangement was he was going to spend the evening with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So as he pulls up to the motel, he's assuming he's going to meet the mother. And so the police find all sorts of things in his trunk, including handcuffs and dog leashes and collars.
Yeah.
That should ring a bell for us.
Pet
it's called
play.
Pup play.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I hadn't worked in prison with perpetrators and also full range of offenders in the way that I did, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have enough knowledge. I didn't know the half of it. But I figured because I had a unique opportunity, meaning I could either go into solitary, deal with guys in long-term solitary. I had a set of keys. So on psychology staff, you have access to everything except ammunition. Well, no outside researcher is ever going to be able to do that. It's a lengthy process. If you're an academic researcher, to have a few hours with a guy. That's why James Dobson only had 3 hours with Bundy. It's a very lengthy process. and all the inmates know that they are being listened to. There's no confidentiality in prison. So if you're there, the only time there is with an attorney. So that's the only time they'll use certain rooms. But for the interviews with the inmates, there isn't that confidentiality. So all the inmates know they're being listened to. Plus, if they're being interviewed, their information is going to get out there. There's either officers in the room or speaker systems. And so most researchers assume that what they're getting in terms of face value information is accurate. They don't know that, especially when it comes to sex offenders, the sex offenders are using that interview to practice for parole.
Okay, yeah.
To see how much is being bought, as it were. Now, it doesn't mean that there can't be information that's derived, but you're not going to receive real definitive information, the stuff that I think is most useful, unless you spend time behind bars with these guys. And so I do sex offender treatment right now. I'm starting my third group. So I've got about 50 guys. That's why I'm having to start a third group. And there's no way. So now I've dealt with predators in prison for 11 years. Now I've dealt with them going on 2 years now as a sex offender treatment provider. And I knew it was true, but now I really know it's true, that there is no way that a researcher that is interviewing someone that claims to be either is a perpetrator or claims to be minor attracted, you are not getting information. Your sole source of information is from self-reports, from the world's greatest liars that always have an agenda and are not sorry. And so if someone says the science is settled, says here's definitive information, the only thing that science can settle about perpetrators is their brain is different. A static moment in time, the rest is conjecture. And then I ask anyone, how much time have you spent? And in what way? What's your methodology? And if all you've had is an office setting, you have inadequate methodology. So I'm very passionate about people understanding the criminal mind, because the worst criminal mind are those that want to defile kids. That's what deviance is. And so that brings us kind of to our topic, what we're going to be talking about, but also for me, my passion, really alerting the public to this grand scam, this scheme called the trans movement, that from my perspective and from my experience and professional background, I can see it's the perfect opportunity for financial and sexual predators to gain direct access to the private spaces. That's what they want. Private spaces of women and children, so they can have access to the private parts for profit or prey. Because if a kid gets on that moving sidewalk, as you know, the end of the line for the trans deception is a surgeon's gurney, and that child will be forever sterilized and amputated. And since when have we ever felt that was beneficial? Everything has been rebranded and reframed, much like cults do, actually exactly how cults do. And so we're taking these kids that the vast majority of them, I saw a pretty good study, about 85%, I would concur, have been sexually abused, those in the trans movement, which means that amount of kids, plus more typically, have a very difficult time with their intuition. Their intuition is that which allows someone to protect themselves, their own boundaries, and a manipulator, predator, perpetrator is going to have to cross boundaries. We call that grooming. All grooming simply means is I'm working you. So I can be a financial predator working on a car lot, and I'm working you. I'm going to upsell you. You didn't intend to take out your wallet and give me as much as you're going to, but because I don't want to go to prison quickly, I'm not going to point a gun at you, but I'm going to persuade you to give me that which you shouldn't, because you can't afford it. Yeah. So why am I doing that? I don't care about you. I've objectified you instead of loving people and using things, as somebody gets into, moves through the stages of selfishness, which I consider narcissism, then sociopathy, and then psychopathy.
And those aren't hardwired. You're saying that's a slope,
right? Again, the best science can do when it comes to sociopathy and psychopathy, and again, these are great terms. They sound really cool. In my estimation, they're about 3,000 years old. Or the terms are new. The condition it's been around since Cain and Abel. And the question is, how does somebody become that way? And so the best we have are static pictures in a moment of time, and then the rest is conjecture. We have a 30-year-old that we can see definitively that the brain of a psychopath is very different. That is very true. They don't have conscience, therefore they have no remorse and no empathy. And for me, it all comes down to conscience, meaning how I understand these guys. And the question is someone born without a conscience? I don't believe so. It's a willful transgression and overriding of conscience. You create a callous, it's cauterizing one's conscience. And to the extent that you want to override or give yourself permission to allow your selfishness to grow, your conscience will begin to become less and less effective. And eventually you can get to a point where you have no conscience. You've overridden your conscience, and therefore you will never be sorry, and you don't care about the impact. So that's psychopathy. But my premise, I'll eventually publish, I just haven't had the time yet, but my premise is there's stages. It's best viewed on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of selfishness. That's really all we're talking about. It's human nature. And to the extent that I care more about me than you, I will begin to view you as a means to an end, a means to my own happiness, a means to my own profit, what it means to my career advancement. Robert Hare, who's father of what they call the father of psychopathy. So he created the PCLR, the Hare Psychopathy Checklist. And he said if he hadn't studied psychopaths in prison, which he actually never worked in prison, but he selected those inmates that were clearly psychopathic. If you're gonna hide a pitchfork under a haystack for your younger brother to jump into the hay to be impaled, you're probably clearly psychopathic. That was one of the examples that he gave, one of the kinds of inmates. Well, that's also where he came up with the different criteria, because you have two kinds of inmates. You have two kinds of psychopaths. You have bloody psychopath and white-collar psychopath. But in the PCLR, it's very interesting. It's geared more to an antisocial, and I'll actually reference one of those, so a more impulsive kind of psychopath. But Robert Hare has written a book called Snakes in Suits. And he said if he hadn't studied psychopaths in prison, he would have studied them on Wall Street. Well, that shows you that they're not all impulsive. They're not all antisocial. The best psychopaths, the smartest ones, end up in politics, in sales, in finance, in psychology, in law enforcement, in education. They're everywhere. They look so normal. James Fallon has been able to do a lot of talk show circuits and other things because he inadvertently scanned his own brain, or he scanned his brain to participate in an Alzheimer's study. Yet his lab or his facility was also being used to scan for forensic purposes the brains of psychopaths. So he had two different studies, as it were, going on. And he was looking through the scans of the Alzheimer's patients, and the names were covered up. And he sees one scan and it's in the wrong pile. So he assumes, he said, why is a psychopath's brain in my... So he straightens out his piles, he looks at the name, and it's him.
Oh, no.
It was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
did he have remorse about that?
I'm sorry?
Did he have remorse about being a psychopath?
No, it's very, very interesting. I've talked about it on my show. I have a live program which is neat because I get to cover just counseling topics on Friday night on TECN, TECN.TV. There we go. But it's funny to listen to them. And what I try to help people think in terms of to get the sort of the awe factor out of the way, because it's clear he has a psychopathic brain. I mean, you can't fake it, because it deals with, when they're assessing psychopathy, it's not IQ, it's not gray matter, it's not white matter, it's function, it's blood flow, it's activity within the brain.
Okay.
And so it's very different.
What processes are prioritized, or
as far as heat. So what portions of the brain are active, and what you find is, for a non-psychopath, so for a normal person, we have a conscience and therefore empathy and remorse, but we have feelings. We don't want to see somebody in pain. So there will be a lot of activity in the frontal and in the side or parietal area, the temporal lobes. So you'll see a lot of activity in the frontal and temporal area of the brain. When we encounter something that pulls our emotions in terms of empathy or sympathy, if we see somebody hurt, if we see somebody that is being treated unjustly, there won't be a lot of activity in the occipital region of the brain. That's where the analysis takes place. So somebody whose feelings are, who has normal feelings, they don't have to think about their response. It just is. But somebody who's over in their conscience, therefore has no empathy, you won't see a lot of activity. So when you see the brain scans of a psychopath, anybody can go online and just do a search, brain scans of psychopath, and a lot of the scans on there are James Fallon's. But you'll see in the frontal area for a psychopath, there's not a lot of activity. It's dark. For the particular pictures they show of their brain scans. During that moment, so the brain scans, the pictures that'll come up are of moments where somebody's brain, if they were normal, there should be a lot of activity in the frontal area, because they're showing them scenes and pictures that would evoke, because when they're in the scan, they're in the tube, they've got a little TV screen. So they're showing them different pictures, such as a kid that's been hit by a car, an animal that was wounded, a child that got his hand slammed in a door, but things that would evoke for anybody just a lot of emotion, including happy things. Yeah. But for the psychopath, so again, normal person, a lot of activity in the frontal area of the brain, very little in the back. It doesn't take a lot of analysis. It's very automatic. For those of us that are normal, we feel things deeply. For the psychopath, not a lot of activity up front, a lot of activity in the back. They don't feel it. And what they're doing is they are analyzing what response people want them to give that's going to be in their best interest, most advantageous. So they are doing impression management. They're working the crowd all the time.
Purely for selfish reasons. They're
correct.
Okay.
That's who they are. They're pure self. Now.
Yeah.
And so the one thing about a predator that those of us that don't understand is a predator is always, always, always on the prowl. And they can't stop. As a matter of fact, 3,000 years ago, the book of Proverbs, read Proverbs chapter 6, and you will see it talks about they're always restless. Now, it doesn't use the term psychopath. It talks about the wicked.
Okay. Oh.
But you can enter a realm as you're going downhill. That's the best way to view it. The best way to view all this is a slippery slope. So you get far enough off the straight and narrow, and there are very real changes that will take place. Your ego will start to grow. Selfishness grows like a snowball. And as it transitions through various stages, there will be a decreasing corresponding effect with certain things. As ego grows, conscience starts to decrease because ego wants what it wants. Yeah. And because of that, you will care less about people. You want more. You're now objectifying. Instead of loving people and using things, now you are loving things and using people. Yeah. And then you're into self-gratification. But the smarter you are, the less impulsive you're going to be. And the smarter you are, And the more psychopathic you become, you will look more normal.
You'll fit in better. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so that's why I'm much more eligible to go into politics or be in positions of influence, because I know how to work the crowd. Yeah. The greatest, the most classic psychopath, and James Fallon references this, is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, this is not a political statement. They are the consummate politicians.
Yeah.
If I can work the crowd, and here it is, if I can turn it on and turn it off as it suits me. You watch Bill Clinton in that famous video clip. He and Tony Campolo are walking out of the church from the funeral of Ron Brown, who was Secretary of Commerce, who died, in my estimation, under interesting conditions. There was a plane crash, supposedly because of fog, but when they did the research, there was no fog. This was over in Europe. Well, so they attend this funeral, Bill Clinton does. Well, he has the quote-unquote evangelical representative walking next to him. So it's a photo op. And as they're walking, they're a little ways away, but the cameras are zoomed in on him. Bill Clinton is on the left. Tony Campolo is on the right. Tony Campolo is actually involved in the conversation. Bill Clinton, of course, is not. Tony Campolo thinks he is, so they've just been laughing about a joke, which is telling. Bill Clinton looks to his left. That's where all the cameras are in the distance. It's amazing to watch this. As a matter of fact, in my next podcast, Analyzing the Brain, we're looking at Sam Brinton, the deviant that just kept stealing women's luggage, which is a very dangerous sign, actually. But I showed the clip. So Bill Clinton, Tony Campolo, they walk out of the funeral. Bill Clinton looks to the left. He's laughing because they're yucking it up. He sees the camera, and split second, we have a sad, pouty face, and he fakes a tear. Tony Campolo doesn't know that Bill Clinton is on cue in front of the camera. And he's confused. Tony Campolo is. So there's a classic example of someone that is pure self.
Okay.
We would call it pragmatic.
Well, pragmatic minus conscience, or what you're calling conscious.
There you go.
Without,
the more pragmatic you are, typically the less conscience you're going to have.
Okay. But
in my estimation.
I have a lot of questions. One question is, psychopathy doesn't necessarily, how does it match up with sadism? Because if you don't feel what other people feel, why would you get off on causing people pain? And maybe that's just a popular imagination that we've married those two. Maybe they're not related. Maybe sadists and psychopaths.
No, they are related. And so it's a misnomer to say that psychopaths don't feel. They feel very much. It's all self. They feel happiness whenever they get what they want. They will be happy.
Okay.
The further someone goes into self, it's not just an intellectual kind of thing. It involves the complete person. So you don't become just a little bit psychopathic, and a lot of things are changing. So not just your intellect. Well, IQ, that's a little bit different. But your character is changing. The drives and appetites change. And the one thing that's different about a psychopath from a sociopath, and again, in my estimation, the best way to view this is, as selfishness increases, there's a lot of changes that take place. I start to harden my heart. I become indifferent. That's just one aspect. But then I start to lose interest in ever being the way I used to be. When I was good, when I understood and appreciated and valued the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. Those of us with a conscience, we not only can't imagine what it's like not to have a conscience, but we have an aversion to that. I think, well, who would want to do that? For those that have achieved the state of having no conscience, it's actually very freeing. And so in the stages downward into psychopathy, it really moves from someone that values a conscience and wants a conscience and doesn't want to transgress their conscience, and therefore they want to keep their conscience sensitive. Therefore, they will respond very quickly. I feel badly, so I'm going to go apologize, or I feel badly, even if no one knows. So someone with a healthy conscience will do the right thing. They will govern themselves. You keep transgressing that, you create a callous effect. You cauterize your conscience. Little by little, it transitions from, well, I want my conscience sensitive to, well, I just don't want it to bother me. I've already moved a couple stages now to, well, this stupid conscience is bugging me. I have to tune it out. Now I'm actively overriding my conscience. I'm in the beginning stages of that. The next stage is starting to be relieved that it's not bothering me anymore, or as much, my conscience.
Yeah.
To getting to a point that I'm actually very relieved that I'm not bothered. To getting to a point where I'm not bothered and I realize it and I'm pretty pleased with myself. To now, this is really transitioning, in my estimation, from sociopathy to psychopathy. That would be bad enough. Somebody reaches a point where they just aren't bothered. But now, growing within them, and this will speak to your point, growing within them is also a hunger and thirst to have an effect.
Or have a connection? Like have a connection? Or
no, I'm sorry. To have a lasting detrimental effect on someone. To prove a point, to have, and here's really a good description of a psychopath in my estimation. They are driven to have the last word, last say, and last laugh. The one thing a psychopath will never say, or a psychopath will say that a sociopath will never say, and again, in my estimation, the best way to view it is selfishness grows if left unchecked. That's narcissism. Or ego. Ego and selfishness, same thing.
Yeah.
As ego grows, it will. And therefore, I become the center of the universe, and I believe I'm entitled to whatever I want as it grows. Think about a 2-year-old in a sandbox. He's got his own toys, but he looks at Susie's toys. That's human nature. So a parent has to come along and say, no. So we have to inform the conscience at age 2 or whatever that, no, Johnny, you have your own toys. So we're teaching private property. We're teaching respect of others. But mom has just corrected Johnny. Mom walks away, and what does Johnny do? It depends upon how willful Johnny is. Yeah. Mom turns her back, and he's going to sneak, and she's starting to cry, and he'll come up with a lie, and so that's older brother or younger brother might tweak older brother. Older brother, reacts, and then older brother gets in trouble, and younger brother's snickering. Yeah. So self is growing. That's narcissism. If you're simple, meaning if you need attention, overt attention, you'll see that person has a mirror, so he looks at himself in the mirror. He's very much, he wants accolades. Those are simplistic narcissists. Those aren't going to get very far.
Because they soak up all the attention in the room and exhaust everybody.
That's right. People catch on right away.
Yeah.
So they have a short shelf life, in my estimation. People know what they're about. So they're going to limit their opportunities. But if they're smart, now, again, they're just as ego-driven, but they learn more how to perfect the art of impression management. Now you're into sales. And now you're operating on the cost-benefit analysis. How much effort versus how much are you getting?
Yeah.
Now you're a sociopath. So we say that sociopaths and narcissists, they have low self-esteem. No, they don't. Now, whacked out self-esteem, not healthy self-esteem, but there's nothing, you look at every politician, to be a good politician, you have to have healthy self-esteem. You'll get up in front of the camera and you'll say, I did not have sex with that woman. As a matter of fact, this is a right-wing conspiracy, and I'm not going to tolerate being distracted anymore. The American people, they voted me in to do a job, and I'm not going to be distracted by these pesky little questions about DNA on a blue dress.
Yeah.
That takes chutzpah. To look at the camera, you keep going in that stage, and eventually
you end up on an island somewhere with a young girl on your life.
Right? Yeah. That's exactly it. So it's no longer then just about what you can get, but now the kind of effect.
Yeah.
And so is transitioning from sociopathy to psychopathy. And now you're going to get off on, power control is in there, but then you're going to move beyond being motivated just by power and control. Okay. Now you really want to mar and scar the soul. And that's where the psychopath becomes malevolent and sadistic.
Is it like a longing for connection?
That's a misnomer. That's a misnomer.
So it's a bad metaphor to think that somebody's disconnected themselves so much that the only way that they can be reconnected to other people is through pain or inflicting.
That's in my mind, in my estimation, Benjamin. I totally understand, right? Because the view of and treatment of predators has now fallen under, and in my estimation, because we have believed urban myths, urban legends, we have now subsumed the treatment of those that offend have been subsumed under the rubric or umbrella of trauma therapy.
Come here, buddy.
My mom's been there for me through every sport.
Nice shot.
Keeping me fueled.
We'll get him next time.
Thanks to her, I finally found what I love.
You're always there for them, and we're always here for you. Food Lion, here for every moment.
Okay, yeah.
That's dangerous, and we have to separate those out, because not only does that misplace sympathies, it shifts sympathies away from the survivors onto the perpetrators, but it's not true.
So only damaged people damage people.
Okay, there you go. That's the lie. It's not true. Right. And the first time I heard that was when I was working with guys in prison. It was, now, mind you, I'm doing sex offender treatment. My whole background was working with survivors and people wounded by the kinds of men I'm working with.
Yeah.
So I know the damage they do. And the first time he says, well, so as I'm trying to give them an opportunity to come clean and kind of tell me whatever they're going to tell me, it became clear that the vast majority of these guys have no remorse. And now they're just trying to fake it to make it to get through sex offender treatment. So I would say, so why do you think you did what you did? Well, had a pretty rough background, did you? Yeah, went through a lot of abuse. Well, first of all, I have access to all the paperwork, all the background, all the files. No outside researcher has that, by the way. So I know there's no verifiable or corroborating information for what he's telling me. When this guy got busted, did he turn himself in because he felt so badly about what he was doing? All the guys in sex offender treatment, I've never dealt with one that turned himself in. I've been doing this for 14 years. Hundreds of men. Not one turned himself in. Why? Because they weren't sorry. They didn't want to stop. I don't care what you say. If you want to stop, you can take actions. You'll either kill yourself or you turn yourself in. So you have men that weren't sorry, are not repentant. It's not hitting bottom for them. It's that they've been sidelined. It's called law enforcement.
Yeah.
Prison. Yeah. Has sidelined them. So they're simply behind bars, and we project onto them what we would think. Oh, if I went to prison, that would be the worst thing in the world. Predators know us better than we know them. And they know, because they once had a conscience, in my estimation, they know what it's like to have a conscience. They have no conscience any longer, so they can use our own conscience and ethics against us. So they will work us. And one of the things that they discovered that we have bought, that's been floated in the literature so much that everybody believes it now, is that a child perpetrator is reenacting his own abuse, having found the age and stage of the child that he himself was perped on. I believed that. It's not true whatsoever. It's a lie. It's an urban myth. Because genuine survivors do not become exploited and predatorial, they become protective. They are the helicopter parents. Well, how did we come to believe this? Well, you had an academic researcher or two or three. I'm not going to necessarily fault them, but a naive one that goes where to interview predators, just on the street. Nobody's going to volunteer that, hey, I'm a predator. Yeah, I'll answer your questions. So you're going to look for men that are justice involved, either in prison or on parole. And the question is, are you going to get accurate information from them? And can you corroborate what they're saying? They're working you. Why? Because they are psychopathic, and they therefore are all about impression management. It's all secondary gains. The guy on parole is only interested in one thing: getting off of parole, wanting you to believe. And he's interested, if you're a researcher, he's interested in what you're going to write. Why? Because he's going to benefit. So he's going to craft things. He's going to craft a narrative for you where you're going to take and you're going to say, we now have definitive finding. Research is found, and that research finding, those research findings are then going to influence public policy, going to influence legislation and sentencing structures. And therefore, if I'm a perp and you're interviewing me, I'm going to fill your head with all sorts of stuff where you're going to think that I'm a really nice guy. I just blew it, had a mistake, or I've always been attracted to kids. I was abused, and it's all a lie.
Yeah.
And you're going to take believing that I've told you the truth. Why? Because I can stare at you in the eye. And I look so sad. I can even have tears come to my eyes. And I can tell you that I didn't intend to, but I fell off the wagon and I was depressed and I was lonely, and my wife and I were having trouble, and I've just never had an ability or the opportunity to really connect. And somehow this 8-year-old, you know what, I just lost my senses, and we had a heart-to-heart connection, and we were really bonding. And before I knew it, I just crossed lines. But I know she was in love with me and I was in love with her, and I have a young spirit, and she's much more mature for her age. And she was just really taking care of me, and love has no age or boundaries or stage, and love is love. And so we really connected, and I don't know what happened. I was drinking a little bit, and I think because I have self-esteem issues, and I've always had low self-esteem issues, and I'm lying to you, by the way. Everything I said, the average person would believe.
Well, that's my other question, or one of my other questions, is that when we talk about normal people and we look at how, especially in the internet age, how our empathy is being hijacked and our care is being hijacked for, to cause political effect. So there's got to be a balance between conscience and not necessarily psychopathy, but we lose connection to analyzing the way that we're being played a lot, and we get in these feedback loops and stuff. So a little bit of callousness when we're presented with media or with certain signals on the internet is actually important for us to make informed decisions. So there's a balance there that we're constantly needing to navigate.
That's right. It's really called discernment.
Yeah.
A manipulator, a predator, perpetrator, psychopath, it's all in a continuum. Again, they know us better than we know them. And so they're always working people. And they will use our ethics against us. So normal people want to give one another the benefit of the doubt. That's social contract. Okay, if I'm a perpetrator, that's all I need. All I need is for you to give me the benefit of the doubt. Therefore, you are not reading me properly. You're giving me a long leash. If you believe that I actually believe what I'm telling you, therefore I'm sincere, now I'm working you. So therefore I can go online on a dating app, or I can be hired on at a church and hold up a Bible and say, my Bible says I am what I am, and I believe what I'm, and all of you thousands out there stand up so you can dig deep, because we're going to plant seeds of faith. 2 Peter chapter 2, written 2,000 years ago, gives a description of a psychopath. It's very interesting. And what it says in that context is, it's not flattering. Peter, everybody's familiar with Peter. He wrote that. He has a criticism, which is basically, how can you be so naive? You have people right in your midst that are working you helping themselves to the cash and the women in your congregation, and you don't even have clue one. That is not spiritual. We're called to have discernment. We're not called to be jaded.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we're called to be judgmental and not just turn the other cheek indefinitely, right?
That's right. And actually, the context for turn the other cheek has to do with being insulted. So we are to have a long fuse. But
yeah.
If
when somebody's coming after your ego, control your ego. But when somebody's coming after the moral fabric of society, you protect the moral fabric of society.
There you go. But in Matthew 7, it's also very interesting. That's where Jesus said, listen, don't judge. So he's checking out motives. But he also says, do not cast your pearls before swine. On my program, I go in depth a lot about that. What are your pearls? Your time, effort, energy, resources. And he says this, and he's speaking to a Jewish audience. You want to get a reaction, serve bacon and eggs to a Jewish audience. Ham and eggs. Okay, so Jesus is talking to a kosher crowd, and he says, "Do not cast your pearls before pigs." Well, that's going to jog them viscerally. Mm-hmm. So he's saying some of you are dealing with things that you are unbelievably not. It's unbelievable that you would be dealing with this kind of person. Why? Yet you're surprised that you have issues. So Jesus was all about boundaries.
Yeah,
he said, "Thou shalt not do what? Cast your pearls before swine." So that means we have pigs around us.
Yeah.
And I had better discern, because the pigs are going to do what? They want my pearls. And so if I can't discern a pig, I can't have healthy boundaries. But the pigs are all about ensuring that I never catch on. So they're going to work my intuition. So the two mechanisms within us to maintain boundaries are conscience and intuition, two sides of the same coin.
And what is diversity, equity, and inclusion when you push that on an entire society? Inclusiveness, equity, fairness, diversity, that erodes boundaries, though.
Absolutely.
It's all about redistribution of not just wealth, but power, attention, and that's perfect for psychopaths.
There you go. Right? Because if I start, my goal is this: I want what you have. I want you. Meaning because I've objectified you, I can financially objectify you. I can sexually objectify you. Yeah. Meaning you're a means to an end to me. So
or morally objectify in the terms of in the virtue signal culture. You're morally objectifying people. Like your morality is a means to my glory.
That's right. But I'm really just manipulating you. I'm manipulating your feelings ultimately to get you to turn your volume down, to override your intuition. Yeah. So it's really the best way to understand all of this is the methods and techniques of cults. That's why you've done such a great job. You look at all the detransitioners. What's so tragic about the detransitioners is they are awakening out of the cult-like stupor of having been worked and manipulated. But it's not bad enough like it used to be in the 70s when the heyday of cults. I was out in Southern California at the time. Hare Krishna, they would be out at the airports dancing and collecting money, or and then you'd find that they would go find their initiates. Okay, they're initiating people. They go to Ivy League schools, UC Berkeley. So they're manipulating all the people into these cults. Well, you watch somebody that comes out of a cult, and they will have to go through certain stages of reconciling. How were they so badly manipulated? Yeah, that's bad enough. They can spend years. As a matter of fact, really, if you think of really whacked out families, dysfunctional families, and this is what I do in the other half of my life, regular kind of counseling. Why do people continue to interact with family? Think about the holidays. Why do people interact with family members that are not healthy for them, that are driving them crazy? We call it love-hate relationships. Why do they do that? We call it trauma bonding. None of that is really true. What they're doing is this. They're trying to ignore reality because they want to believe. So they stay in a detrimental situation.